The hearing room was supposed to be just another day in Washington. Lawmakers scribbled notes, cameras blinked red, and aides shuffled papers as if nothing historic was about to happen. But then, Reverend Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her voice slicing through the stale air like a blade. "Donald Trump's fingerprints," she declared, her eyes locked with steel intensity, "are all over the Epstein cover-up." The room froze. It wasn't just a statement. It was an accusation loaded like dynamite, aimed straight at the heart of power. You could feel the collective inhale, the way reporters glanced at one another in disbelief, their pens hesitating mid-air. Was she really going there? Was someone finally bold enough to connect the dots that so many had danced around? On one side of the chamber, allies of Trump shifted uncomfortably in their seats, smirks faltering into nervous half-smiles. On the other, Democrats sat straighter, their eyes widening as though they'd just heard history turn a page. Crockett didn't blink. She didn't flinch. Her words weren't a slip of the tongue or a reckless jab. They were deliberate, calculated, and heavy with the weight of a truth too long buried. For years, whispers had swirled, questions about Trump, Epstein, and the silence that always seemed to follow. Every time the story threatened to erupt, it was smothered. Headlines disappeared, testimonies got lost, powerful names stayed off the record. And now, here was Crockett, dragging it into the light with a single unflinching sentence. The cameras zoomed in. Clips of her words would be replayed 1,000 times before the day was over. Social media was already buzzing, phones lit up, hashtags formed, outrage built like a gathering storm. But in that moment, inside the chamber, the silence was deafening. Trump loyalists tried to regain composure, clearing throats, rustling papers, looking anywhere but into the fire of Crockett's stare. She had detonated the opening shot of a political drama that would not be contained. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because the true weight of her words, the evidence behind them, the stakes they carried, and the storm they unleashed, was about to make even the most seasoned players in Washington tremble. The silence that followed Jasmine Crockett's declaration didn't just hang in the room, it thundered across Washington. But to understand why her words cut so deep, you have to look at the shadows they pierced. For years, the name Jeffrey Epstein had been a ghost that haunted American politics. A billionaire playboy with powerful friends, his scandal reached into the highest echelons of wealth and influence. But every time the truth threatened to surface, someone, pulled the strings to bury it. And among those whispers, one name was repeated more than any other: Donald J. Trump. It wasn't just about photographs at Mar-a-Lago or casual quotes calling Epstein a terrific guy. It wasn't just about being neighbors in Palm Beach. It was about the endless coincidences, the suspicious silences, the uncanny way doors slammed shut whenever the connection was raised. Now, in the heart of Congress, Jasmine Crockett had torn off the veil. She wasn't just making a statement, she was placing the former president at the center of the darkest cover-up in recent history. The stakes were enormous. Trump wasn't just a man, he was a political movement. To accuse him meant challenging millions of loyal supporters, a media machine ready to spin, and a Republican establishment prepared to crush dissent. It meant painting a target on your back, and Crockett knew it. She wasn't naive. She understood that the second those words left her lips, she would be labeled reckless, partisan, even unhinged. But that was the power of her moment. She chose to speak anyway, because the truth mattered more than her reputation. Think about what was really at play. If Trump's fingerprints were all over the Epstein cover-up, then the story wasn't just about two disgraced men. It was about corruption baked into the very foundations of power, where billionaires, politicians, and elites close ranks to shield each other from accountability. This wasn't merely about scandal. It was about justice denied to countless victims. It was about the rot at the core of American politics. And Crockett wasn't whispering in back rooms or hinting to reporters. She was saying it on the record, in the open, in a place where history keeps score. Reporters outside scrambled to push. Alerts to their newsrooms. Producers barked orders. Get that clip, play it on repeat. Cable networks cleared space on their Chiron. Crockett accuses. Trump of Epstein cover-up, Twitter lit up like a wildfire. Influencers reposted the soundbite, captions screaming, "She said." What we've all been thinking. Millions watched, shared, debated. The story was no longer contained, it was exploding. But for every cheer online, there was a counterstrike building. Trump loyalists sharpened their knives, ready to paint Crockett as desperate, attention-seeking, part of some vast partisan hoax. They were preparing to swarm, to discredit, to overwhelm the truth with noise. And that's why this moment mattered. Because Crockett hadn't just accused Trump, she had forced the country into a choice. Ignore her and let corruption tighten its grip, or confront it and risk tearing open wounds the powerful wanted closed forever. The stakes weren't just political, they were moral, they were national. They were personal to anyone who believed that truth still has a place in American democracy. And yet, as seismic as her words were, the drama was only beginning. Because what came next didn't just raise eyebrows, it made even the most seasoned lawmakers in that chamber gasp in disbelief. If Jasmine Crockett's words were a match, then Donald Trump's past was the tinder waiting to ignite. Because the truth is, this wasn't the first time his name had brushed against the shadows of Jeffrey Epstein. Far from it. Their connection was one of those open secrets in America's political gossip mill. Everyone knew, yet few dared to say it out loud. Let's rewind. Palm Beach, Florida, the 1990s, a world of champagne, private jets, and whispered invitations. Epstein was rising in influence, his mansion infamous for gatherings of the powerful and the untouchable. And right there, often within arm's reach, was Donald Trump. Trump once called Epstein a terrific guy. He didn't just know him, he enjoyed his company. There are photos of them laughing together, sharing space at parties, standing shoulder to shoulder as if they belonged to the same world. For years that was exactly the case. And then there's the infamous line Trump once gave to New York Magazine. Epstein likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. A throwaway quip to some, a dark admission to others. But history has a cruel way of turning jokes into evidence. When Epstein's crimes finally surfaced, Trump tried to distance himself. He claimed he wasn't a fan, that they had a falling out, that he barred Epstein from Mar-a-Lago. But here's the contradiction. If Trump truly had nothing to do with Epstein's world, why did their paths cross so often? Why did their circles overlap so closely? Why did silence always follow questions about how deep their relationship ran? The villain in this story isn't just a man, it's the pattern. The arrogance of thinking scandals can be shrugged off. The contradictions, that pile up until truth becomes impossible to ignore. Trump's denials always came wrapped in bravado. But bravado doesn't erase history. And let's not forget, Epstein's story itself reeks of cover-ups. Arrested once, given a sweetheart deal, surrounded by whispers of powerful friends pulling strings to keep his secrets safe. Who benefited from those silences? Who had the most to lose if the truth ever fully surfaced? Crockett's accusation wasn't wild. It was piercing at the heart of a history already stained with corruption. Imagine being one of Trump's loyalists in that chamber as she spoke. They knew the history. They knew the headlines, the quotes, the photographs. They had defended him countless times before, brushing off accusations as gossip, as partisan smear. But this time felt different. Because this time, the words were not coming from journalists or activists. They were coming from a sitting member of Congress on the record, in full view of the nation. And Trump's backstory with Epstein isn't just about one man's poor choices of friends. It's about a larger web of hypocrisy. Trump often styled himself as the champion of law and order, the enemy of predators, the defender of women. Yet when it came to Epstein, silence and contradictions were all that remained. Even Trump's presidency couldn't escape the shadow. Every time Epstein's name surfaced, Trump's past comments came back like ghosts, haunting press briefings, forcing evasions, spinning denials. When Epstein died in custody under mysterious circumstances, conspiracy theories erupted, and in every dark corner of the internet, one question lingered. Whose secrets went to the grave with him? That's why Crockett's words landed like a hammer blow. Because she wasn't introducing something new. She was connecting dots that had always been there, dots the public had seen but been told to ignore. And this is where the villainous contrast becomes undeniable. Trump, the man who built his brand on power and excess, always skating past accountability, always deflecting blame. Against him, the image of Epstein, the predator who hid behind wealth and influence, shielded by powerful friends. And now Crockett was daring to suggest that Trump wasn't just a bystander, he was part of the cover-up itself. That is the essence of the antagonist backstory. A man whose fingerprints always seem to show up, but whose lawyers, allies, and media defenders always manage to wipe them clean. Until now. The chamber buzzed with tension. Defenders of Trump whispered among themselves, trying to steady the ground beneath them. But the damage was done. Crockett had forced America to remember what it wanted to forget. And yet, the story was never just about Trump, because every villain needs a counterweight. Every shadow demands a source of light. And as this confrontation unfolded, the true strength of that light was about to be revealed. To understand why Representative Jasmine Crockett's words carried such force, you have to understand the woman behind them. Because Jasmine Crockett is not just another politician on Capitol Hill. She is a fighter forged in the fires of struggle, sharpened by battles that began long before she ever stepped foot in Congress. Born and raised in Dallas, Texas, Crockett grew up in a world that didn't hand her anything. She knew what it was to work twice as hard for half the recognition, to be underestimated before she even opened her mouth. But she also knew the value of resilience, the strength that comes from refusing to accept no as the final answer. Law was her battleground. Before politics, Crockett was a civil rights and criminal defense attorney, representing those who couldn't afford powerful lawyers or big names behind them. She was the one who stood beside the voiceless, the marginalized, the forgotten. In courtrooms across Texas, she took on cases that others wouldn't touch, fighting for clients who were easy to discard in a system built to favor the privileged. It was in those moments, facing judges, juries, prosecutors, that she learned the art of standing tall under pressure. It's where she developed that sharp, fearless voice that would one day echo across the chambers of Congress. She wasn't defending power, she was defending dignity. And that matters, because in politics, the ability to withstand pressure isn't theoretical, it's survival. The halls of Washington are filled with people who bend when the wind shifts, who trade conviction for convenience. But Crockett's life had taught her the opposite lesson. When the storm hits, you plant your feet. Her rise in politics was never easy. In Texas, she faced backlash for speaking too bluntly, too boldly, for refusing to conform to the polished, rehearsed style of politicians who speak in safe half-truths. But that was never her way. She wasn't there to be safe. She was there to be honest. And when voters sent her to Congress, she carried that same energy with her. On Capitol Hill, where decorum often masks dysfunction, she stood out as someone who didn't mince words. Her questioning style became infamous, direct, cutting, unafraid of confrontation. For her, every microphone was a weapon against corruption. It's no accident, then, that Crockett was the one to drop the line about Trump and the Epstein cover-up, because she had lived her entire professional life as the one willing to say what others were too afraid to. She had built her identity on calling out hypocrisy, even when the cost was high. But there's something more, something deeper that makes her story resonate. Crockett's identity is also rooted in the reality of being a black woman in American politics. That means every word she speaks is judged more harshly, every misstep magnified, every show of passion labeled as angry or unprofessional. She knows the double standard. She has lived it, and yet she refuses to be silenced by it. That refusal gives her power, because when she speaks, when she looks her opponents in the eye and tells the truth they don't want to hear, it isn't just her voice they're fighting. It's the voice of every person who has been dismissed, underestimated, or pushed aside. Her critics call her fiery, combative, too much, but her supporters call her fearless, authentic, necessary, and in that chamber, When she declared Trump's fingerprints were all over the Epstein cover-up, it wasn't just a political jab. It was the culmination of years of being told to sit down and refusing every single time. Think of the symbolism. On one side, Donald Trump, billionaire, former president, man of privilege who has always had the system bend to his will. On the other side, Jasmine Crockett, daughter of Dallas, lawyer for the voiceless, a woman who carved her way into the halls of power not by wealth or pedigree, but by sheer will. That contrast is why her words landed with such force. Because Crockett's backstory isn't just inspiring, it's proof that truth doesn't always come from the powerful. Sometimes it comes from those who have had to fight for every inch of space they occupy. Sometimes it comes from someone who knows what it means to stare down the system and say, "Not this time." So when she leaned forward and delivered that line, it wasn't just Jasmine Crockett, politician, speaking. It was Jasmine Crockett, fighter. Jasmine Crockett, defender of dignity. Jasmine Crockett, the voice for those silenced too long, and that's why the chamber fell silent. That's why her words could not be brushed aside as theatrics, because everyone in that room knew, whether they admitted it or not, that she was uniquely prepared for this battle. Her whole life had been leading to that moment, and as the confrontation unfolded, Crockett's composure would be tested in ways that revealed the depth of her resolve. Because the pushback, the insults, the attempts to break her focus, they were coming. And the clash was about to escalate into a spectacle no one would forget. The moment Jasmine Crockett uttered Trump's name alongside Jeffrey Epstein's, the atmosphere inside the chamber shifted from tense to combustible. What had begun as a statement now teetered on the edge of full-scale confrontation. You could almost see the political fault lines cracking open right there in real time. Republicans on the committee were the first to move. A few scoffed loudly, leaning back in their chairs as if to dismiss her words with body language alone. One muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous." But the microphones caught it, sparking an audible reaction from the audience seated behind. Crockett didn't flinch. She had lived her entire career being underestimated, interrupted, talked over. She knew the playbook. Instead of raising her voice, she let silence do the work. She paused, eyes locked on her critics, until the weight of her words settled into the cracks of their denial. Then came the counterpunches. A senior Republican leaned into his microphone, his tone dripping with condescension. "With all due respect, Representative, this kind of rhetoric diminishes the seriousness of this committee's work, throwing around wild accusations against a former president," but Crockett cut him off with surgical precision. "Wild accusations?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "Or a truth that terrifies you?" The chamber erupted. Some gasped, some applauded. The chair banged the gavel, calling for order, but the sound was drowned out by the murmurs and whispers filling the room. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards, already drafting headlines. This was no longer a hearing. This was theater. Political theater at its most raw. And Jasmine Crockett was the lead actor, refusing to let the script be rewritten by those desperate to silence her. The escalation was more than words. It was a battle of composure. Crockett, calm but unyielding. Her opponents, rattled but trying to mask their unease behind mockery and derision. Every barb thrown her way only sharpened her resolve. One Republican tried to pivot, accusing her of playing politics for the cameras. But Crockett leaned into the very cameras he mocked. "If the cameras are rolling, then the American people deserve to hear the truth," she said firmly. "They've waited long enough." That line was fire. It ricocheted off the chamber walls, feeding the energy online as the clip spread. Social media accounts clipped the exchange within minutes, captions blazing, "She's not backing down." Every second the clash dragged on. Crockett grew stronger while her opponents seemed smaller, more desperate. They raised their voices, gestured wildly, but nothing they said could erase the fact that she had thrown a gauntlet they were terrified to pick up. And then, as if to reclaim control, one of Trump's staunchest defenders raised his voice. "This committee will not be used as a circus for baseless attacks. If you have evidence, present it. Otherwise, stop smearing the name of a former president." Crockett leaned forward again, her tone steady but her words sharper than any raised voice. Baseless attacks? What's baseless is pretending we don't all know the history. What's baseless is protecting power at the expense of justice. I will not apologize for refusing to play along with your silence. The room was electric. Even those trying to remain neutral could feel the shift. It was no longer a question of whether Crockett would back down. The question was, how far would she push? The gavel came down again, louder this time, but the noise couldn't contain the truth of the moment. Crockett had escalated the confrontation into a battle of moral clarity. And yet, the real strike, the moment that would live in viral clips, in headlines, in history books, had not even landed yet. Because what came next wasn't just rebuttal, it was revelation. The kind of revelation that doesn't just shake a room, it shakes a nation. The chamber had descended into a storm of noise, voices clashing, gavels pounding, cameras whirring like restless eyes trying to capture history in the making. But amid the chaos, Jasmine Crockett sat steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pound the table. She waited, and then, when the clamor dulled into uneasy silence, she delivered the strike that would echo far beyond those walls. Donald Trump's fingerprints, she said again deliberately, are all over the Epstein cover-up. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't theatrical. It was steady, precise, and devastating. The room inhaled sharply, as if the oxygen had been snatched away. This time, there was no mistaking her intent. She wasn't tossing out rhetoric. She was laying down an indictment, not legal, but moral, political, historical. The Republicans froze. Their earlier smirks evaporated into a kind of stiff panic. Papers shuffled. Chairs creaked, eyes darted, searching for some line of defense, some talking point, some clever quip that could undo the blow. But there was nothing. Nothing could erase the gravity of what she had just put on the record, and Crockett knew it. That was the brilliance of her counterattack. She wasn't just aiming at Trump. She was aiming at the silence, the years of shrugged shoulders, the buried headlines, the whispered excuses. By saying aloud what so many had avoided, she shattered the illusion of untouchability. The cameras zoomed in, capturing her face in crisp detail, calm, composed, unmoved. That image, of a woman unafraid to stare down the legacy of a former president, was already traveling across the country. Clips would soon play on a loop, hashtags would erupt, memes would be born. But inside the chamber, the drama unfolded in real time. One Republican scrambled to regain control. "That's outrageous," he barked, his voice cracking under the pressure. "You're slandering a former president with baseless conspiracy theories. This is beneath the dignity of Congress." Crockett turned toward him, her expression steady, her voice measured. "What's beneath the dignity of Congress is pretending we don't know the truth. What's beneath the dignity of this body is protecting a man whose record reeks of corruption, while victims of Epstein's abuse still cry out for justice." Gasps rippled through the audience. Even some of her opponents shifted uncomfortably, as though the weight of her words struck something deeper than politics. She didn't stop there. She leaned in, her words deliberate, her tone like a prosecutor laying out evidence before a jury. Donald Trump didn't just cross paths with Jeffrey Epstein once or twice. They were friends. They traveled in the same circles. He called him a terrific guy. He admitted they both liked beautiful women, many on the younger side. And when Epstein's crimes finally came to light, Trump suddenly claimed he wasn't a fan. That isn't coincidence. That's cover-up. The room buzzed. The facts she laid out weren't new, but strung together, they became a weapon. She had transformed scattered quotes and photographs into a narrative so sharp, it cut through the noise. Her opponents tried to interrupt, but the momentum was hers. And let's not forget, she pressed on, when Epstein received his sweetheart deal, when prosecutors bent the rules to protect him, who was in the orbit of influence? Who benefited when Epstein's secrets stayed buried? These are not wild questions. These are the questions America deserves answered. Reporters' phones lit up as they typed furiously, transmitting her words to the world in real time. On Twitter, The clip of her fingerprints line was already trending. Hashtags like Crockett exposes Trump and Epstein cover-up began their climb. The public was not just watching, they were reacting, amplifying, choosing sides. But the true brilliance of Crockett's counterattack wasn't only in the facts, it was in the framing. She positioned herself as the voice of truth, dignity, and justice, while casting Trump as the symbol of corruption, cowardice, and secrecy. Hero versus villain. Light versus shadow. Her composure only deepened the contrast. Where Trump's defenders grew louder, more desperate, Crockett grew calmer, sharper, more precise. It was as though she had rehearsed for this moment her entire life. And then, she delivered the line that sealed it. You can call it rhetoric, you can call it politics, but the American people know what they've seen. They know who was there, who stayed silent, and who has always found a way to slip through the cracks. What they deserve, what history demands, is accountability, and no amount of power, wealth, or privilege should place anyone above that. Silence followed. Not the uneasy silence of denial, the heavy silence of recognition. The chairman's gavel banged again, but it sounded small compared to the thunder of Crockett's words. In that chamber, she had shifted the ground beneath their feet. Outside, the ripple effects were already beginning to surge. Trump's defenders looked shaken, their rehearsed talking points useless against the weight of her strike. Allies whispered urgently, trying to figure out how to spin the moment. But, deep down they knew, this clip was going viral, and no amount of spin could erase the image of Jasmine Crockett unshaken, staring down the ghost of Jeffrey Epstein and the shadow of Donald Trump. The mic drop wasn't just in her words, it was in the aftermath. In the way she leaned back, folded her hands, and let the silence speak louder than any rebuttal. She didn't need to say more. She had already written the headline, carved the soundbite, defined the moment. And yet, even as the chamber simmered, the true battle was spilling beyond its walls. Because what happens in Washington no longer stays in Washington. It travels, at the speed of light, through tweets, through TikToks, through cable news and podcasts. The shockwaves of Crockett's counterattack were only beginning to spread, and the fallout? It would not be contained. The gavel struck, but the sound was hollow. Jasmine Crockett's words were still vibrating through the chamber, through the press pool, through every phone streaming live to audiences across America. A statement that powerful doesn't stay contained. It detonates, and the blast radius spreads far and wide. Within minutes, news outlets scrambled to shift their coverage. CNN's banner lit up. Crockett, Trump linked to Epstein cover-up. MSNBC cut programming to run the clip on loop, with anchors marveling at her composure. Even Fox News, caught flat-footed, scrambled to control the narrative, some calling her accusation reckless, others shifting to defense mode, insisting this was another partisan witch hunt. But the genie was out of the bottle. On Twitter, or X as some stubbornly refused to call it, the hashtags erupted. Arn Epstein cover-up. R Crockett vs Trump. No one above the law. Clips spread faster than wildfire, spliced into reels, layered with dramatic captions. One edit froze on Crockett's face as the words, "fingerprints all over the cover-up," echoed in slow motion. Millions viewed it within hours. TikTok creators jumped on the wave. Reaction videos, duets, breakdowns of her quotes. Crockett had become the center of the cultural conversation. Even those outside of politics weighed in. Comedians, influencers, late-night hosts. Suddenly everyone had an opinion, and for Trump's camp, the scramble was visible. His most loyal allies hit, the airwaves calling Crockett's statement outrageous slander. Some dredged up old smears against her, painting her as an attention seeker. Others leaned on the familiar script. This is all part of the witch hunt. But for every defensive soundbite, Crockett's clip replayed again, and again, and again. The difference this time? The public wasn't tuning it out. They were leaning in. Victims' advocates seized the moment. Organizations that had long fought to keep Epstein's crimes in the spotlight praised Crockett's courage. Survivors themselves began posting online, saying her words gave them a glimmer of hope. That maybe finally, Someone in power was willing to risk everything to demand accountability. That was the human cost of this story, and Crockett had forced the country to face it. But shockwaves don't just move one way, they rebound. And almost instantly the backlash grew. Right-wing media launched coordinated counterattacks. Conspiracy blogs twisted her words, claiming she was deflecting from Democrats' ties to Epstein. Memes mocking her spread through pro-Trump channels, trying to drown her out with ridicule. And yet something about this moment felt different. The defense rang hollow. The talking points felt recycled, tired, brittle under the weight of fresh outrage. Crockett had shifted the tone. She wasn't alone in whispering the question anymore. She had said it out loud, and millions were now repeating it. Why did Trump's name keep circling Epstein's? Why did the story always seem to vanish when it reached his orbit? By the end of the day, Capitol Hill itself was rattled. Some Democrats publicly praised Crockett for her bravery. A handful of independents cautiously admitted the questions were fair. Even a few Republicans, always careful with their words, privately, grumbled that Trump's shadow over the party was becoming unbearable. And then came the polls. Snap surveys showed the story breaking through in ways few scandals had before. Among undecided voters, a surprising number said Crockett's words raised serious concerns about Trump. Among younger voters, she was trending as a symbol of fearlessness, a new kind of fighter unafraid to challenge the untouchable. Cable networks leaned into the frenzy. Panels dissected every syllable. Body language experts were called in to analyze her calm demeanor. Strategists debated whether this was a turning point or just another flare-up in the endless cycle of political scandal. But for those watching closely, one fact was undeniable. Crockett had altered the terrain. She had forced Epstein's ghost back into the conversation and tied Trump's name to it in a way that couldn't easily be erased. Inside her office, Crockett received floods of messages, praise, support, threats. Staffers warned her the storm was only beginning. She already knew. But she also knew the truth. Once the silence breaks, it can't be restored. The shockwaves were bigger than her, bigger than Trump, bigger than the chamber where it all began. This wasn't just a political skirmish. It was the battle for memory, for narrative, for how history would record one of the darkest chapters of American power. And as the sun set over Washington that night, one thing was certain. The world had heard her words, and nothing, not spin, not denial, not even Trump himself, could unsay them. The shockwaves had only just begun. As the firestorm raged across headlines, timelines, and airwaves, one truth crystallized. Jasmine Crockett had crossed a threshold. Few dared to touch. She had dragged a shadow into the light, and in doing so, reframed the entire debate. Yet even as her words echoed across America, Crockett herself returned to something deeper, something beyond the politics, beyond the cameras, beyond the fury of partisanship. She reminded those listening why she had spoken in the first place. "This is not about me," she told a local reporter that evening. "It's about what we're willing to accept as a nation. It's about whether we're willing to keep pretending, or whether we're finally ready to demand justice for the victims, for the truth, for the future." And that was the moral pivot. Because at its core, the confrontation wasn't just about Trump or Epstein. It was about America's relationship with power itself. The cover-up, if true, was not simply a political scandal. It was a betrayal of trust, a violation of the very idea that no one is above the law. Crockett's insistence that silence is complicity struck a chord precisely because so many Americans had felt the weight of silence in their own lives. The immigrant silenced by fear, the worker silenced by exploitation, the survivor silenced by shame. Crockett's words gave them something rare in the halls of Congress. Representation not just of identity, but of dignity. And that dignity became the lesson. Because in the face of arrogance, Crockett did not meet rage with rage. She met it with composure. She didn't shout down her opponents. She stared them down. She didn't ramble. She cut through the noise with scalpel precision. That posture, the quiet, defiant dignity, became her armor. And in it, millions saw not just a politician, but a reflection of themselves. Her clash with Trump's defenders was more than spectacle. It was proof of something universal. That courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers truth so sharp they can't be ignored. In living rooms across the country, families debated what it meant. Some saw her as reckless, others as heroic. But regardless of where they landed, they couldn't deny one fact. She had shifted the story. She had forced a reckoning, and reckonings carry lessons. For Crockett, it was that silence is the enemy of justice. For the victims, it was that their pain was not forgotten. For the audience, it was that truth, even spoken against overwhelming odds, still holds power. Her resolution was not a closing argument, but an opening invitation. If you believe in justice, she said in her final statement of the night, don't just watch this moment. Be part of it. Speak up, stand tall, refuse to be silent. Because justice doesn't happen when we wait. It happens when we demand it. Those words became the heartbeat of the moral lesson. Justice, silence. Truth, power. Dignity, arrogance. And in that simple equation, the drama of the day transformed into something greater than politics. It became a parable for the nation. A reminder that the American story has always been written by those willing to rise when it's easier to bow. The clip of her final line spread just as quickly as her mic drop moment. But this time, it wasn't just trending hashtags. It was pinned posts, profile bios, protest signs. Her words leapt from screens into the real world. And for millions of viewers who had felt powerless, it became more than a political drama. It became personal. The moral clarity of the moment lingered, like the last note of a song that refuses to fade. America was left with a choice, not about Trump, not about Crockett, about itself. Would silence win again, or would truth finally have its day? That was the question Crockett left hanging in the air. That was the challenge she dared the nation to answer. And as the chamber lights dimmed, as the news cycle churned, as the hashtags trended, one thing was undeniable. A new line had been drawn. Between truth and denial. Between dignity and arrogance. Between silence and justice, the lesson was clear. The lesson was, the choice was ours. And so, the moment that began with a single name, Trump, collided with one of America's darkest shadows, Epstein, and produced a confrontation the country could not ignore. Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak. She detonated silence. She forced the nation to face a truth too many had buried, that when power shields itself from accountability, justice dies in the dark. But tonight, the darkness was pierced. Her words, Trump's fingerprints are all over the Epstein cover-up, were not simply accusations. They were a demand that justice be more than a slogan, a demand that silence no longer be the price of survival, a demand that America remember who it claims to be. And that is where you come in. Because Crockett's courage is only as powerful as the movement it inspires. Her voice lit the fire, but it is the people, the millions watching right now, who must keep it burning. Ask yourself, will you let this moment fade into another forgotten headline? Or will you carry it forward, amplify it, and make sure it lives on? If you believe in justice, if you believe in dignity over arrogance, if you believe that truth must outlast lies, then don't just watch. Act. Share this video. Subscribe to this channel. Join a community that refuses to look away when power tries to cover its tracks. Because history is not written by those who stay silent. It is written by those who speak, who fight, who refuse to bow. And together, we will not be silent.